Is that what we're talking about, Wally?
Yeah, yeah, we just started.
I thought we were talking about how to pick up chicks. Cool. Hello. So what we're going to talk about today is what we're doing and how we approach intelligence and how we go about producing intelligence. I'm the guy up on the top. This handsome, stupid old man is the guy on the bottom. And we're going to talk to you about a couple of things. We're going to talk to you about who we are, what is intelligence, and then how our group produces intelligence. I work for Intel Security. I've been with Intel Security for like 300 years. So I started with them when it was Network Associates, and then it became McAfee, and then we got bought by Intel, and then we became Intel Security, and then we're going to become McAfee again next year. So, you know, it's a wild ride. And what we'll talk about is what our group does. We have a very small group of individuals, and we produce intelligence, and nobody knows what we do, and that's kind of by design. So there's three parts to our team. So the first part of the team is the team that I'm in charge of, which is the intelligence and research team. We also have a tools and capabilities team, so we have our own development guys in-house. And then we also have a group that does private cloud, which is kind of irrelevant to this talk. But so we have access to all of McAfee's collections, and that might not seem like that big of a deal to you. But when you think about it a little bit differently, McAfee is kind of like, who's worked for in intelligence before? Anybody in here who's actually worked for the NSA or the IC or something like that? Yeah, if you understand how intelligence is collected, McAfee kind of serves as our SIGINT collection, right? You know, so we've got technologies deployed all over planet Earth, and those things gather data, right? And that data is sent back to McAfee Labs. Some of that stuff is host-based, some of that stuff is network-based, some of that stuff is honeypots, you know, shit like that. And it's all collected, and we use it to perform analysis on. But the difference is how we go about doing it. And we'll get into kind of the makeup of the team in just a second. But it's important to understand that the difference between threats and actual intelligence is significant. So most of the rest of the industry, to them, intelligence is what? Threat feeds, right? All right, it's a list of IP addresses, or it's a list of domains that are bad, or it's a list of hashes. And don't get me wrong, that's important, but that's not intelligence. That's data. It's not even information, quite frankly. It's actual data. The difference is that what we do is we actually produce intelligence, and I'll get into the makeup of the team in just a slide or two. But it really comes down to the stuff that's on the right, is at the end of the day, we answer questions. We were spun up 4 years ago to work with a couple of very specific customers, just the IC, and we answer questions. We answer who, what, when, where, why, and how kinds of questions. The reason nobody has heard about us is because we were actually required to only work with intelligence community customers up until about 6 months ago. We were allowed by the company to bring our services to other people, but that's the stuff that we do on the right. We do indicators of attack, we do social network analysis, we do threat response, we do persona development, we do actual intelligence. And this is the reason. The reason is the makeup of our actual team. We decided a long time ago that if you wanted to produce intelligence, you had to hire intelligence professionals. Wow, fucking brilliant, right? You're sitting there going, wow, you're going to produce intelligence, you can hire intelligence people. That's fucking amazing. All right, well, believe it or not, nobody else actually does that. Most people hire people who know how to reverse malware, or they know how to do IR, or they know how to do forensics. That's all well and fine. That's not producing intelligence. Our team is composed of guys like him. Guys like Wally are actually credentialed intelligence professionals. Now, Wally is a Marine. Now, you may think to yourself, Dave, how can you use the word intelligence and Marine in the same sentence? And that would be a fair question. How can you use intelligence and Marine in the same sentence? Wally is an intelligence professional. He's a credentialed intelligence professional. He's not the only one on the team. Wally will get into this in just a minute, but our team is actually made up of 3 Marines, myself, and my counterpart who actually has a background in APTs and intelligence for the DIA. That doesn't mean we don't know how to reverse engineer malware. That doesn't mean we don't know how to do the IR stuff. The difference is the team is made up of intelligence professionals. And we're going to kind of get into that in just a minute. But if you want to actually produce intelligence, which is actually answering questions, then you need intelligence professionals. And I'll let Wally talk a little bit more about, you know, combined tours in Afghanistan and exactly what he did in his background.
Yeah, so amongst our whole team with the Marines, we have 24 combined deployments. I've done 5 myself, Africa, 2 tours in Iraq, 2 tours in Afghanistan. The gentleman on the end, he's done 12 himself, or actually 14 himself.
14.
So it's a lot of time in country where you actually get to do your job and you get to get good at it. We've supported 9 different agencies between the 3 of us, which is pretty awesome. That gives you a very well-rounded, comprehensive look at how different agencies do different things. And the main part for us for this brief is HVI targeting. All 3 of us on top, we were all with the Kill Capture program. We've supported special operations, special forces, and the Marines. So we'll get into on further slides, but that experience, taking that from a CT perspective to a CT focus and molding that into the cyber realm is where we're making our money.
So think about that for a minute. Who knows the terminology pattern of life or social network analysis? I don't mean social media analysis. I don't mean just doing searches on Twitter and shit like that. I mean social network analysis and pattern of life development. So the kinds of stuff that Wally and his counterparts used to do was identify tomorrow's target list from today's collections. So you look at phones, you look at who they know, you look at their network, and you develop your target list for the next day. We are taking those methodologies and molding them to our realm, to the digital realm, and doing the same basic thing for, and I apologize for using this word, cyber criminals.
Drink.
Bring me the alcohol and I shall drink it. But you understand what I mean. We're taking established methodologies of analyzing patterns of life, social network analysis, and taking it from the realm of taking down terrorists and now taking down cyber criminals, cyber actors, and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so looking at intelligence, there's a lot of different ways to generate intelligence. It's pretty much infinite, just like anything else. For our specific focuses, we're going to talk about targeting. So targeting is the process of selecting objects, installations, people that need to be attacked, destroyed, or taken off the battlefield. So targeting systematically analyzes and prioritizes those targets as a measure of importance from tier 0 to tier 5. So targeting can be broken down into 2 categories, deliberate and dynamic. Deliberate being like before the invasion of Iraq, you bomb their anti-aircraft missile systems, you take out their power grid, you take out their communications, you take out their strategic assets. That's deliberate. That's well planned in advance and it's executed accordingly. So deliberate is more of the time-sensitive targeting. That's the targeting of people. So within the CT realm, you know, if like we heard on some talks earlier, if a guy's in real time talking about putting an IED in on Twitter, well, that would be a dynamic target. You would build a plan very quickly, and you would look at your assets in the area, and you put a bomb on the guy. So with targeting as our basis for the intelligence, we use the F3EA methodology to find, fix, finish, exploit, and analyze. So the application, so I'll break down that just a little bit. Find is where we find a person, place, or thing, and we start gathering. Fix is the actual product that we build, whether that be a quad chart or a targeting package. Finish is the actual execution of that target. Now, for the CT realm, obviously that's capture or kill. For a cyber target, you know, that's more an arrest or a shutdown. So exploit. A lot of places don't put a lot of thought into what happens after that operation. So after that operation on the battlefield, you have fingerprints, DNA, pocket litter, hard drives, cameras, things of that nature. We collect all that. That goes into multiple systems, and we start analyzing it. And analyzing being the last part, we use all that data, especially cell phones, especially computers, to find follow-on targets, who's their friends. It helps us build that counterterrorism network.
So you think, stepping back a second, this is how you find an Osama bin Laden, by the way. You don't find Osama bin Laden by finding Osama bin Laden. You do it by profiling the network around the individual you're looking to target. Pattern of life, social network development. It's not just the person, it's all the people around them and their network, and the network that communicates with them. That is actually what Wally is talking about and what we are adapting to the cybers for lack of a better word. And I'm 3 shots behind now because I've used the word cyber 3 times. I apologize.
So in practical application, how does it actually work? We identify new targets. Now for CT, that's obviously a bad guy, or a facilitator, or the guy who delivers IED parts, anything like that. We use multiple intelligence sources for our work right now. It's mostly open source, so basically the internet is our playground. We develop pattern of life and bed down locations. So for CT and for the cybers, another drink, that looks a little different, but the methodology is still the same. Support to operations, that's in the CT world, you build a product, that product goes to the commander, it meets the commander's intents, and it also has to merge up with operational intent, air assets. I mean, a lot of stuff comes into play. So after that, after the operation actually goes on, you target the devices that are captured, you take pocket litter for exploitation, that all comes into one big kind of melting pot, and then you perform your analysis on everything and you develop new targets and you start the process all over again. So the execution of the target, basically, you know, how do you pull out data? And we'll go into this a little bit on another slide, but finding the target. So with our methodology, you can use very little bits of information to start a target package. So a random document, any type of blog, any type of intelligence reporting.
It could be a piece of malware, it could be an IP address, it could be a domain. It's a point that we start with.
And once we pull data, we capture everything. Even if a lot of places, people will look at a piece of data and they'll be like, well, that's not important, so I'm not really worried about it. We capture everything every time, all the time. Because we don't know what's going to happen 2 months down the road. That little bit of insignificant stuff may be very important down the road. So during the fix process, this is where we really make our money. This is where the time's spent, building analytical products with link analysis, being able to display visually our thought process and what the target's actually doing and what that network looks like is very important. Finish and exploit, like we talked about, they're pretty much the same thing. The operation and the exploitation happen near simultaneously. And then we analyze and repeat.
Yep.
So now I'm going to talk a little bit about special operations methodology. Are there any Green Berets in here or any Marines? All right. So the Marine Corps, some parts of the Marine Corps, special forces, special operations, are masters at unconventional warfare. And a good way to look at the methodology is the Iceberg. And so this is we doctored this up a little bit. The original one's really grainy. But when you're talking about unconventional warfare, you're talking about a paramilitary force or a guerrilla force. And there are overt and covert and clandestine things that happen within a network. So the overt is what you see on the TV. This is the large and small scale attacks. This is subversion of the government. This is international communications, sending out spam, per se. But where the real money is and where we look intensely are the clandestine portions of the iceberg. So, and we have another slide similar to this one, and it will explain why this has to do with hackers. So how do we produce intelligence? Dave might want to talk to this some more. So
Sure.
When I got there, a lot of the capabilities that me and my guys brought to the table didn't exist.
You see, if you think about it, there's 2 funnels there. The left funnel and the right funnel. The right funnel is the stuff that Wally and the guys bring to it, and the left side is kind of the stuff and the capabilities that the traditional digital warriors kind of had, right? We have our collections of malware, we have our collections of spam, we have our collections of where it came from, all that kind of stuff. However, the kind of stuff that Wally and the intelligence professionals bring to the table is a disciplined analytical and intelligence process. Meaning, we're just taking their skill set and pointing them at a different target space. And that target space is what you can get out of the target space by taking intelligence professionals and turning them toward it. Turned out to be better than we could have possibly imagined. We thought it would work, but we didn't know it was going to work actually as good as it did. So we're taking the disciplined, credentialed intelligence professional and turning them toward 25 years of malware collections, 25 years of IP address collection, 25 years of open source intelligence collection, and then producing intelligence deliverables out of that based upon the questions that our customers ask us. And the customer is going to ask us, not what does this piece of malware do, Most of our customers don't really ask us questions like that. Even our intelligence community customers don't really ask us those questions. They don't really care. They've got their own reverse engineers. They know damn well what the malware does. They don't want to know what the malware does. They want to know who is producing it, where are they producing it from, what verticals and horizontals are targeting it, do we think it's going to be active in 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months? Those are the kinds of questions that they're looking to answer. So when we take guys who's got Wally's background and turn them toward that targeting set with access to the data that we have, magic happens.
So what we brought to the table was open source intelligence, social network analysis, HVI targeting, also soft methodologies, and link analysis, and human. Now the human, a lot of people have asked me this weekend and periodically, what does human have to do with cyber? So a real quick, cool example is we'll get into one of the groups a little later, but DD4BC, DDoS for Bitcoin. So we got a bunch of PNGs and pictures from the internet of their ransomware attacks against different businesses of different types. So I took it upon myself to start calling these pizza parlors in New York, which was awesome because they're like, "What is DDoS?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, here we go." So being able to talk to people and being able to pull information out of our customers who've been attacked and being able to get the right answer instead of just, well, we've been attacked, happened this time. There's more to it, and the human background, gives you some of the skill sets to actually get more answers out of them, and in the appropriate way as well. So basically, we take everything that was existing in this huge database, combine it with all of our techniques, and then we use APG attribution, and we mix it with our research project material, and we get a target package, and that package goes to the rest of the community.
So the reason, and most people laugh when they start talking about China did this or Russia did that, right? And it's laughable in the news for a reason, right? And it's laughable because it's not really based upon truly baked and delivered intelligence. It's possible to do baked and delivered intelligence. You have to have intelligence professionals to do it. Simply saying it came from an IP address in China is not attribution. Simply saying it came from a piece of malware that we've seen used in spam used by the Russians before is not attribution. That's a place to start your attribution. That's a place to start your link analysis. That's a place to start your human, but it's not the end state. That's the difference between what our team is doing and what most of the rest of the industry is doing.
So let's go on. So there we go.
By the way, this one is for all of you people. Cyber pathogen. You're welcome. You're welcome.
So
everybody should have to drink over that one. You're welcome. Man with the cyber pathogen hat in the back, by the way, you bastard. Wouldn't let me wear it during my presentation. And he's actually got a cyber pathogen hat on his big noggin.
So Intel 101, like one of the first things you learn when you start going to Intel school, whether it be Intel Analyst or if you're working in signals intelligence, is the intelligence cycle. Now there are a lot of different intelligence cycles. This one is the traditional basic intelligence cycle. And what we've done, and that consists of multiple parts. Planning and direction. So for us, that is looking at a target and finding what's been attacked, looking at the threat, and determining the course of action you're going to take. Collection's pretty obvious. We collect all the relevant data, and we use stuff from McAfee Labs, industry products, etc. Processing and exploiting. This is where we go in and we take a look at everything we got and we start to enrich it. So if we have like Excel spreadsheets full of IP addresses, we'll run those and find the hashes associated, the domains associated. Moving on to production, we take everything that we built, and at this point we already have really good link analysis products. We also have anywhere from pictures, things that you would consider evidentiary, and we start compiling it into a solid thought so that it's not data. That's when you start turning stuff into intelligence instead of data. Dissemination, once we have a finished product, that goes out to our partners, law enforcement, the IC, corporations. And then the final step is utilization. So once we're done, if we learn something, we tend to recycle that back into the process.
And we'll give you a couple of examples of that. Some stuff that Wally had done early on with DD4BC turned out to be very beneficial when we were asked to look at lock-in, when we were asked to look at other things like Bitcoins and things like that. So you cannot collect too much data. You cannot archive your previous intelligence products enough.
Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the hacker iceberg. So one of the first things that we know is hacking is unconventional warfare. So works really great because a lot of the methodologies mold into each other, it being so unconventional. Hacking isn't tank on tank by any means. So with the overt and clandestine sections of the hacker iceberg, if you're looking on top, the things you see in the news, ransom payments, DDoS, doxing,
WikiLeaks.
large-scale data breaches, hacktivism, those are what you see like in the news, and that is the overt portion. So we'll go into some examples of the clandestine later and why it's important to target those. But whenever a hacker group outsources Bitcoin wallets, or they outsource ISPs, things like that. That's all in the clandestine realm. Let me
Move on, that's fine.
So case studies. So with any law enforcement or anything, you have to follow the money. It's with crime, organized crime, terrorism. The money's important. So what you see on top is from Maltego. We'll use Maltego to initially run a Bitcoin wallet, and then we take all that data and we transfer it into Analyst Notebook, which we'll get into shortly. So basically,
That's one Bitcoin, by the way.
that's one Bitcoin.
That's the trail of one Bitcoin, followed through tumblers and everything else.
So we've been able to identify tumblers and mixers.
Yep.
It's really important to track the money, basically, because this is how these criminal organizations work with cryptocurrency. So one thing that's really important to understand is that crypto doesn't translate to privacy. So it doesn't matter how cryptologic your Bitcoin wallet is, you can still see all the traffic everywhere. So it may get really big like this really quick, but all the data's there.
Yep, you can throw tumblers into the mix, it can get moved to 25 different wallets, but it's all still trackable if you have the means to track it and the ability to catalog all the information, which is, again, I can't emphasize enough, it's hard to do, you need resources to do it, but it's doable. Cryptocurrency is, like Wally says, by no means private. It's anonymous to a certain extent, but it's not private. Somebody has to take it out somewhere, right? All of that is inherently trackable.
And so when we start processing the data from Bitcoin, we get IP addresses, we get email addresses, we get names, phone numbers. We found out pretty quickly that those aren't, a lot of those, not all of them, aren't from a proxy server or anything like that. They're the actual device that transferred the money from point A to point B. IP addresses are targetable information, and we get an incredibly large amount of data searching Bitcoins.
Or it's a place to start pattern of life development.
And that's how we start pattern of life development. So you can look at pattern of life from money as well. It doesn't have to be necessarily, on today I went to the store and then I went and drove to get coffee and then I picked up the kids. That's all pattern of life, but you can also look at money for pattern of life. So we mentioned DD4BC before. One of the great things about the way we do business is each project, we save all the data, and then at the end, we do what's called a master merge. So master merge is basically a compilation of all of our projects into one, at least the link analysis portion. So DD4BC, they specialize in DDoS attacks, and basically they choose like an industry. And so for a period of time, they'll DDoS pizza parlors. Then they'll DDoS banks. Then they'll DDoS airlines, any millions of things. They even DDoS Bitcoin. So what we did was basically, this is representation. So we took a look at DD4BC and we looked at all their Bitcoins and we ran all the wallets. And so this is just a picture for the brief. There's tons of data behind it. Later on, about 8 weeks later, we started taking a look at the Ashley Madison exploit. And it turned, when we merged them together, we found out that, hey, that's weird. Some of the DD4BC Bitcoin wallets are also being used by the Ashley Madison exploit attackers. And so what does that tell us?
If you have a large enough data set, you will find connections if they're there to be made.
And those are, some connections can be loose, but these are pretty direct connections.
Yep.
So the areas where you see the Bitcoin and where they meet between the green arrows and the black arrows, that's the underground. That's the clandestine portion. That's what you see as a result of the underlying clandestine factors to a hacker group.
Any questions so far? Cool.
And so actually catching the bad guy, because all this is great in theory, but if you can't actually catch a guy, then it's not really that important. So this example, this is from Bitcoin. The actor's, his screen name is Jay Bluey, which wasn't very smart because his real name is Jay Bluey. So not very brilliant, okay? All this data we got from exploiting Bitcoin wallets.
Yep.
So the IP address was for his parents' company, where he used a corporate computer at the Antimog family-owned business. Not very bright. So he did have some success exploiting people for Bitcoin, and then he bought himself a brand new car that was way outside of his family salary, and then he started posting it online. Pretty easy to catch.
But again, think about the train of thought there, right? Starting with something nebulous, a DDoS against a bank or a DDoS against a pizza parlor, right? Gathering information, large set analysis, merging it with other data that you have, and developing the social network around the DD4BC attack. So you're not going to find the DD4BC guys just by looking at the Bitcoins and just by looking at the malware that they use. You will find out technical information about the attack by looking at that, and that's great, all right? But if you want doors kicked in and you want motherfuckers to go to jail, you got to step past that, and you got to start looking at how you get to the keyboard and the person behind the keyboard. That is pattern of life. That is social network analysis. That is what led to that slide there, by taking trained intelligence professionals and actually having them think past the keyboard and mapping out, all right, it's that IP address, all right, it's potentially that Facebook account. Who was that Facebook account attached to? What other things is that communicating with? Let's throw it all into Analyst Notebook, let's do some transforms, and let's see the links that we actually develop as a result.
So another really important analytical necessity with all this, a group like DD4BC isn't a centralized group. There isn't a commander, there isn't then workers behind that. So with our methodology, looking at collecting data and looking at things the same way, the same every time, you find different actors spread across the world. And a lot of that comes from exploiting things like Bitcoin, doing social network analysis, and et cetera. So, A and B is a program that we use. I've talked about it a little bit.
Analyst Notebook, for those who don't know the acronym.
So Analyst Notebook, to a trained intelligence analyst, allows you to take huge amounts of data and find connections within that data that you can't see from an Excel spreadsheet, basically. So what we do with this, Locky as a service, one of our customers, they sent us about 250 IP addresses, and they were like, hey, would you guys take a look at this, tell us what we got. So 250 IP addresses with nothing else to it is just a straight line, it's just icons. So what we did is we ran it through our in-house systems that are tools that our developers built that help us automate some of the process, and we take all that data then, and we just throw it into the machine and say, show us what's going on. And so we got samples.
Yep.
So in a circular pattern, we know two different things. So we have complex and simple connections. So to the right of sample A, you see that there's one central point, and that central point has a lot of connecting nodes. That could be an IP address, and then those are the hashes associated with it. You don't know until you zoom in. Now the sample on the left is much more complex. That's more of a network. Move to the next.
Back up once.
Oh, sure.
So just so you understand, we were actually given a very small set of data. We had to take that small set of data, like Wally said, about 200, 250 IP addresses. That's not enough for us to do real statistical analysis and to really develop a pattern of life and really develop the network. So we were able to say, all right, those IP addresses are our starting point. What ransomware or what Locky samples are associated with those IP addresses? What other IP addresses and samples are then associated with those? Take those, throw them into Analyst Notebook to actually develop a solid series of patterns.
So when you change the view, it really lets you take a look at what's important within that network. So how many nodes are connected to point A to point B? So this is called Peacock Mode. It allows us to identify highly connected entities, basically. So this is something that's a really, really important, especially when you're looking at large amounts of data. And this is just one sample. So it goes from 4,000 and then it's broken down, and now you have this, and you're like, okay, well, there's something here at point A, there's something here at point B, there's something here at point C.
And if you're a law enforcement house, things like this become very interesting because, as you'll see in another slide or two, those intersection points are different parts of the world. And if you can help LEOs start identifying, law enforcement agencies identify the parts of the world a sample comes from or the parts of the world a group is operating from, they can work with their partners and they can kick down doors or they can develop their own networks of information of where bad activity and bad actors are actually producing.
So when you change the view, the most interleaked entities, you can see them very easily. So you can't do this without this type of link analysis. So this is the micro stage of everything. Basically, we're able to pull out very specific data from macro to micro, and we're able to look at it and point out specifically interlinked entities and focus on them and their associates.
Yep. So just so you understand what this chart actually is, the thing in the center is ransomware. That's a locky sample, and all of these are either the drop sites that it's getting pushed from or the C2 nodes that are actually connecting to it and talking to it. So all of these we would then take and do pattern of life and network development around. So, can you not hear me? I don't care.
No, because not on the microphone.
Let me have the microphone.
No, he's got it.
What? Oh, Joey. Joey. It's Joey's fault. That's fine. Can you hear me now? All right, so like I was saying, so what you see in the center here is the actual Locky ransomware sample. Things on the right or the things on the left is either the point that that sample is being distributed from or the point that it's actually collecting its actual data or its actual Bitcoin transactions. All of these would then be further developed to figure out what their network is behind it. IP addresses, who it's talking to, types of samples, things like that. Registrants, parts of the world, those kinds of things. We were actually able to connect also the stuff on the right to a couple of different actors that were doing other things, which is also very, very interesting. But all of this becomes points that can be quantified because all of these have networks around them which guys like Wally can further develop. Oh, and then this one. Give me my microphone back. Heckler. So what this is, go back one slide, Wally. Thank you, Vanna. So this is a, I'm going to pay for that later. Yep. This is a specific part of the world. So we were then asked by this particular law enforcement customer to then provide a specific geographical mapping of where in the world these samples are. That then yielded this slide right here. So we were able to take, remember, we started with about 200 IP addresses. We were able to do a lot of analysis that actually produced the specific parts of the world these samples were being distributed from, the parts of the world that they were being collected, and the areas of the world that they were actually exploiting customers in. And we were actually able to narrow it down to the hosts, the registrants, the IP addresses, as well as the hosting facilities that were actually pushing the malware, all of which then can be further developed through social network analysis to figure out which sites got owned, why did they get owned, which versions of Locky are they distributing. This then allowed the customer who actually asked us to do this, this gave them the ability to contact law enforcement in that part of the world, and this part of the world, and this part of the world to do site takedowns. So pretty cool stuff. Last one. I can do this from up here. All right, so about 2 years ago, there was an incident, and this is all public, so I can talk about this. There was an incident 2 years ago where the Joint Chiefs of Network, Staff Network got compromised. If you understand the chain of command in the DoD, the Joint Chief of Staff is fairly important in the grand scheme of things. Network got compromised, and we were asked to take a look at the sample. So we were provided a spreadsheet of about 500 indicators of compromise, IP addresses, malware, samples, and domains. We were able to take those samples, provide further intelligence on them, but it didn't stop there. The really important things were we were actually able to say, these samples are signed with digital certificates, all right? These digital certificates have been used in other campaigns by Russian adversaries. However, The particular samples that we actually ran across were actually compromised Windows digital certificates, so that's just about as bad gets. So the samples that we actually had run across were compromised Windows XP Service Pack 3 digital certificates. So we had malware that we were able to find on the DoD network that was actually signed with Windows digital certificates. That's pretty cool in and of itself, right? But it allowed us to actually tie it to Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear. If you're familiar with that, it's APT 28, APT 29. We were then able to, in another year, tie this to the DNC compromise because, again, we maintain all of this information and we archive it, and we found that the samples being used and the C2s being used and the infrastructure being used were commonly used by other Russian adversaries, and we were able to tie that together. But the important part is actually on the bottom, and so this whole slide really comes down to the bottom part, is the fact that we actually were able to provide conclusive evidence that there were compromised Windows digital certificates. The DoD actually took the step of saying, you are going to move from Windows XP to Windows 10 as a result of what we had found. Now, despite the fact that they may never actually move to Windows 10, that's a different issue, because government moves at the speed of government, right? I mean, just because the DoD CIO says you're going to do X doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow, all right? But that's beside the point. Sales and implementation are two different things, right? So the point being is because we were actually able to say conclusively, you have an actor at play who knows what they're doing, Fancy Bear, Cozy Bear, and actually able to say Windows certificates were found to be on the malware that we found that you provided to us. The DoD CIO took the step of saying, you will move your network from Windows XP, which is compromised, to Windows 10. And that's a pretty interesting strategic decision when you really think about it. You can't get that from just a data feed. You can get that from actually providing your customer with actual baked intelligence, and that's kind of what this had done. So it was something that we're really, really proud of. And their guys had completely missed, so we were pretty proud of that. This also ties to something that's actually going on in the news right now, so that's kind of cool as well, because generally when you have an adversary in your network, they're there for at least a year when you find them, and chances are they're walking laterally and horizontally across your network anyway. So if I can recommend anything to anybody who does IR and forensics is catalog everything. Catalog everything that you find, put it in a database. Something that we actually do. Anybody hear of CRITs? So if you're familiar with the CRITs database, CRITs allows you to correlate across campaigns. So one thing that we actually do that we've benefited heavily from is we correlate across all campaigns and all incidents that we actually work on. So in the case of this, we were already tracking Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear for a lot of good reasons. They're an interesting actor to actually track. They know what they're doing. Whenever something new comes in, we enrich what we're already tracking. So if we're working on a new case for a particular customer, we will pivot across all the stuff that we're tracking, and we will find commonalities between actors and adversaries that most people don't actually ever run across. We currently track about 140 actors and adversaries, and we're always cross-correlating across it. So we find commonalities like this actually all the time. And going back to something that Wally was talking about previously, is this is an area that's been hugely beneficial to us, is tracking Bitcoins. What we're starting to see is Bitcoin usage among ransomware. We're starting to see commonalities with Bitcoin usage among other actors. If you understand the difference between how crimeware is funded and how APTs are funded, the crimeware guys have to build up a war chest to continually develop their tools, right? The APT guys usually have sponsorship, and they don't necessarily need to farm out their activities. So we're seeing a huge amount of ransomware commonalities with Bitcoins, and that's actually very fascinating to us because it talks to a lot of fraud, and we can track a lot of that fraud. So that slide kind of speaks to what we're seeing long term, is that stuff that we didn't realize was connected before, Locky, ransomware, certain denial of service attacks, certain DD for Bitcoin kind of stuff, is actually connected at an infrastructure level. And if you're already tracking one and you start tracking the other, if you've got enough data, you'll start seeing intersections between them. I think that was our last slide before, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that was it. Oh, well, how about that? That was the last slide. Any questions I can answer, or Wally can answer, because he's smarter than I am? He's way smarter than I am. And he's a far more handsome man than me, too, I'd like to point out.
That's true.
Sir?
Do you see that same Bitcoin process being used for eliminating actors because you get false positives, stuff of that nature?
Be a little bit more specific about that.
Grandma buys something with Bitcoin, and she has a name that's similar to someone else, and that guy buys something on.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So the question is, can we differentiate between grandma who uses Bitcoins versus an adversary who's actually using Bitcoins, right? It gets a little bit funky when you get Bitcoin tumblers into the mix, meaning when one Bitcoin is talking to a tumbler that then takes that money and distributes it to a lot of other Bitcoins and stuff like that. So there's going to be some intermixing along the way. However, the problem you run into is once a Bitcoin transacts with a dirty Bitcoin, the money is dirty. It's like laundering money in the first place. Once it intermingles, it can be very difficult. However, if they're using distinct Bitcoin addresses and not using tumblers, it's fairly easy to eliminate the good usage and grandma's use of Bitcoins. It's fairly straightforward to eliminate it if you're doing the large set analysis. If you're only doing small set analysis, probably going to make a lot of mistakes and a lot of assumptions. But if you're doing a large enough set of analysis and you can determine whether it's going into a set of tumblers or not, it's fairly straightforward to factor it out.
And a lot of it comes down to analytical due diligence as well. And after you look at this for a while, grandma's not buying $425 gift cards.
Yep.
You know,
So it can be, again, applying the analytical process and looking at the large set, you can factor it out. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
That's a great question.
Yeah, the key thing is what tools do you use to actually differentiate?
Gotcha.
And what I heard was scale.
Scale, an analyst notebook, and a trained analyst.
Yeah.
That's it's going to be the combination of that. Number one, amount of data that you're actually looking at. Number two, the right tool set. Number three, the guys with the brains. Did you have another question on that? It sounded like you had another question to ask.
Oh, no, that was the key thing.
Cool. Any others? Sir?
You talked about taking today's intelligence and creating tomorrow's target list.
Mm-hmm.
How far are you ahead, or how accurate are you with, say, something going on with Russia, and then listening to what's coming across the wire to predicting what's coming up? And do you warn ahead of time, or is this like a pay-to-play service kind of thing?
That's a great question. We generally do not get into predictive analysis because that doesn't really work very well. What we develop and the stuff that you see here is based upon the questions that our customers ask us. And most of our customers are not asking us what we think is going to happen specifically in 6 months or 12 months. Generally, they're asking a different strategic question. They're asking, for instance, a question we got asked by a pharmaceutical company was, is our oncology research going to be targeted differently than someone else's oncology research? Not what day is it going to happen and what specific defenses do I need to use. So we just haven't gotten asked those kinds of specific questions. We would look at some of those if we got asked a question, but we just haven't been asked that. It's much more strategic rather than the tactical kind of stuff. Is be aware on the 23rd in 6 months this is going to happen. We haven't really gone there. And I don't think I'd ever want to go there because there's just too many other variables.
Do you warn on generalities with that?
Absolutely.
If there's someone's talking about it, X is going to be a target.
Absolutely. So if we're doing stuff like brand monitoring, so for instance, if customer X asks us to look at their brand for X period of time, then absolutely. We'll put tracking in place and we'll put some predictive analysis in place if they're being talked about. So our financial customers actually ask that question a lot. How are we being talked about on the dark web? That's a big question to them. Or if they wound up in the news because of social justice warriors, or they had like a sex scandal at their C-suite. How is that going to affect anonymous coming after their websites? That's actually a fairly common question that we're asked. And then we can actually say to them, this period of time they're talking about you strongly, and they're talking about coming after you. Be aware for the next 3 to 6 months. So we do stuff like that absolutely when asked. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Cool. There was a question over here. Get back to you in a minute. Sir.
Have you ever had a request from a LEO organization that you weren't comfortable with processing in terms of tracking down activity monitoring, or is it just when they come to you and say, we need help running this down, you just automatically as a group do it? Is there some process where you guys go through and think, that's not something we want to engage in, we're not comfortable with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you get into
Please repeat the question.
oh, sure. The question basically was, have we ever been asked questions we weren't comfortable providing an intelligence answer on? essentially. Is that an okay cribbing of your question? So the question being is, have we ever been asked a question by law enforcement or a customer that we weren't comfortable answering? We haven't been asked any questions like that. There are certain lines that we, however, will not cross. When you're getting into, look, we're an American company, and we have to be sensitive to our customers. Our data, a lot of the data that we look at is McAfee data. It's McAfee customer data, so we have to be sensitive to the fact that there are customers who pay us to protect them. And even though the intelligence agency or the LEO may ask a question, we have to be very sensitive to the fact that, the customer pays our bills at the end of the day. So we haven't been asked anything yet that we've had to say no to, but we have rules of engagement just like everybody else. And there are lines that we absolutely will not cross. We also do not give access to our data. Let me be clear about that. So often we will get asked, the reason I don't like showing our dashboards is because people always ask, when can we use our dashboards? You can't ever use our dashboards. Because our dashboards have direct access to McAfee data, and we do not give people access to McAfee data. So that's what we do. We serve as a proxy between the customer's request and providing them an intelligence answer. So nobody gets access to the data. We provide an answer to a question when asked, but we have rules of engagement. Absolutely. Does that answer your question, sir?
I was actually following it from his. Have you guys done any work as far as setting timelines for known actors? So, like, we know as of January 2015 through February 2015, they were building the war chest, and they and due to prior behavior, they usually have a latency of 3 months.
Gotcha, great question. So the question is, because I'm going to get told to repeat the question. The question being, are we ever asked to provide timelines for certain types of activities? So can we develop a timeline when we think energy is going to get attacked over the next 6 months or something along those lines? The answer to the question is yes, actually. And we're in the middle of doing something like that now based upon tool disclosures. So some tools have been recently disclosed and shared on certain websites. So we were actually asked, are they being used by actors? What industries are actually being targeted? And do we think that's going to be a problem in the next 3 to 6 to 12 months? So the answer to the question is actually yeah. But, you got to take it with a grain of salt, right? I mean, intelligence can be wrong sometimes. So, there's the coda of just because they're talking about it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate to it. But if there's intelligence behind the fact that they're using these tools, and those tools are used against an energy sector because the energy sector uses the product that the vulnerability was released in so we'll do a timeline analysis of stuff like that, so absolutely.
So in addition to that, whenever we're building charts, whether we're hand jamming information or bringing it in a tabled format, if there's a date associated with that data, no matter what it is, we put it in there. And with Analyst Notebook, we can create a timeline from large amounts of data. It'll pull out all the data that doesn't have a timeline, and you can just click go, and we can get point A to point B dated if you have that data available. Yeah. Sir.
Yeah, with that follow-up, have you seen patterns?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
That's what we do.
Wow.
Sorry.
To form the question correctly.
All right.
Have you seen patterns related to the buildup of Bitcoin? So a bad actor builds up, several $1 million of Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden things happen.
So to repeat the question, have we seen any patterns with Bitcoin and it gets to a certain point and they dump their money, things like that?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We see an incredible amount of patterns with Bitcoin. Everything from the lifespan of that Bitcoin wallet to the type of tumbler they use and how long they use it, and then they'll drop it for a while.
Yep.
And then 4 to 6 months later, you'll see it get used again. And so they have a big bowl of Bitcoin accounts, and they section it off. They use this many for this attack against this industry. And when they are attacking this industry, they're using these tumblers and these mixers. And then once the money is out of those systems, they start with another that they have in their back pocket. And then that repeats itself, and then occasionally they bring on new Bitcoin.
It gets really funky when you throw ransomware and stuff into it too, because ransomware uses some of the same wallets and stuff like that, and then they go dead after a while, and then they come back in 6 months. But again, if you've got the data to actually do it, that's really what it comes down to. And some of the stuff that we had invested in early on pays off long-term, and the tracking of Bitcoins is a really big deal. And then you throw in the 27,000 other kinds of cryptocurrency that there are, and then you can track, it just left Bitcoin and went to this one, and then it went to this one and went to this one. Even though, again, it's cryptologically secure, it ain't private. You know, you can track the motion, and boy, following the money works.
What about like regular currency, you know, where they steal U.S. dollars or euros and things like that through credit card fraud and other things?
So the follow-up question was, how about standard forms of currency and stuff like that? We're not currently tracking any of it. Again, because of the nature of the team and the access to the data that we have, just haven't gone there. There's better places to go than, you know, us for stuff like that. This is kind of our bailiwick and our soft spot, our sweet spot. So we haven't just been asked to go there yet. Are we doing time-wise? I'm done. Oh my God. If anybody
off
has
the
any follow-up-
stage.
Anybody has any follow-up questions? We're around, so feel free to hit us over the head later on. Thank you all very much for your time.